Aside from perhaps feeling like you're always hungry, what other kind of symptoms or experiences may someone be able to identify in their own life that could be suggestive of under-consuming protein?
It's really vague, if I'm honest. So unless you were looking at the extremes of protein deficiency, which is where, you'll see this in famine-torn countries where they suffer from kwashiorkors and edema and fluid accumulation, or you see this within, developed nations, and you have very frail individuals who are suffering from sarcopenia and other forms of malnutrition. The symptoms can be really vague. So cravings is certainly one of them. I would say brittle nails, skin, hair falling out. You can have fatigue, energy crashes. These are poor recovery after exercise. These are all suggestive of not having enough protein in your diet. But again, these are all super vague as well. There could be anything from an autoimmune condition to the symptoms of menopause. So it's very hard to determine from symptoms alone whether you are consuming enough, which is why I would say a pragmatic thing to do is try and figure out what your number is and aim for that in the first instance. But don't be beholden to the number either. We'll probably talk about this later when we talk about calorie balance. If you feel that you are satisfied at a lower amount of like 1.4 or 1.5 grams, you don't need to push yourself to 1.6 just because Dr. Rupy said this is going to be important for all the proteins in my body. Your body is going to tell you the right amount by telling you when you are satisfied and you've eaten enough.
Yeah, I remember looking at it was a meta-analysis looking at the difference in strength improvements at varying levels of protein intake in two different contexts. One context where there's no resistance training, and the other context where there is resistance training.
Okay.
And you can imagine when you dial up your protein intake without resistance training, you'd barely see a blip or a change in strength, as you would expect. But whereas when resistance training is in place, you do see an increase going up from like 1 to 1.6. You see it. But most of the increase is achieved by 1.2. And I always try and remind people of that you are squeezing like the last few drips out of the towel as you go up, at least from a strength perspective. But if you're at 1.2 and you have the training stimulus there, like you're doing most of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I say in my book, actually, I remind people of the fact that whilst protein is important, the biggest lever to your health is going to be exercise. And I say that, with all the biases towards food as I have, like, I love cooking, I love people getting excited about eating well, but exercise is definitely the biggest lever, and it's very hard to run away from that fact. So unless you're doing resistance training, you really shouldn't be thinking about increasing your protein beyond 1.2, I would say. But in combination, I would say it's worth the extra squeeze.
How do you think about where the protein's coming from? So we've got the amount. Let's just say someone's listening and they've calculated and they're like, right, I'm going to target 110 grams of protein per day. Next step, where am I going to get that protein from?
Yeah. So I used to be a lot more fastidious about looking at the quality protein metrics and looking at the graphs of the number of amino acids and the percentage quality, looking at PDCAS and DIAS. And DIAS, which is I'm going to blank on the name now, dietary something
digestible, indispensable
amino acid score, something like that. Together we got there. So look, I think it's a good rating system. It's looking at ileal digestibility rather than fecal, the latter end of the digestive tract digestibility. It is a very robust tool, but it was utilized, I think, in its essence by the agricultural organizations to look at the quality proteins to prevent malnutrition globally. So the use case of DS was not to look at the anabolic potential of protein. So it's just something to remind people of. And the other pitfall is it grades a protein based on the lowest amount of the amino acid in said protein. So by virtue of the fact that plant-based proteins are going to be low in one or more amino acids, it's always going to rank lower than chicken or whey. And if you're too focused on the quality metrics, all roads lead to whey protein in chicken. So,
which would be important perhaps in a country, a third world country, where they have very little diversity. Because if you were under consuming total protein and just eating corn, for example, then that by definition that you could run into an issue in terms of being able to have all the Lego pieces to do what you were talking about.
Exactly, yeah. And so in the context of developed environments, we tend to have mixed meals with multiple different sources of proteins from plants and from animals. And when you're consuming this, the combination of grains and beans, which you can see across different cultures, that's amazing that from a societal, from an anthropological or theological perspective, it's very apparent that all these different backgrounds, these different cultures have figured out this is going to be important for our health, and which is why you see beans and grains and all this kind of stuff in most cuisines. You don't need to worry too much about that. I say too much because I fell into this pitfall myself, and this is where I'm a big fan of things like soy, tempeh, and even things like edamame, which I know is another legume. So I'm more focused on total protein rather than looking specifically at getting it from the highest quality proteins. But within that, it would serve to diversify as much as possible and lean into some of the highest quality plant-based proteins if you can tolerate them.
Yeah, I read in your book the bit about soy, and I was nodding my head because I think if you were allergic to soy foods, to try and not that you're putting forward that people should eat plant exclusive, but there are people that do that, myself included. And if I was allergic or intolerant to soy, the amount of food volume that I would be eating or the amount of processed foods I would be eating would increase significantly.
Yeah, I know. It's an uncomfortable fact, right? But it's a fact. But it's a fact. It is a fact. I had Dr. Helen on my podcast recently. She's an allergist, a specialist in the UK. And we were going through all the different commonly consumed foods that have allergens, and soy is right at the top, along with pea and dairy as well, and eggs. So it's not an uncommon issue for a lot of people, which is why I put it in the book. Because if you do have an issue with consuming soy, it means most of the tempeh is taken off your diet. I mean, tempeh is a fermentation process, so you can have different ingredients that you can ferment in the tempeh style. So it doesn't always need to be soybeans, but it's commonly with soybeans. If you have an issue with soy, if you have an issue with tofu and edamame, you're really going to struggle. And this is actually where I think, although I don't want people to rely on protein powders, this is where they might actually hold a big purpose if you can't consume from other sources. And the beauty about these protein powders, the more modern ones, is that they've looked at the amino acid profile and they're combining things like pumpkin seeds and rice and corn to cater for all those different amino acid pitfalls of each individual one, which means you're going to get enough leucine, you're going to get enough methionine, which are commonly deficient in lots of different plants. And these are really important for the process of muscle protein synthesis. So there are definitely solutions, but we definitely need to be more cognizant about protein, particularly in that population of vegans and vegetarians.
When it comes to gut health, I couldn't find a supplement that did it all. So I formulated one with gastroenterologist Dr. Will Bolsowitz. It's called Daily Microbiome Nutrition, or DMN, by 38 Terra. And to our knowledge, it is the most complete prebiotic formula on the market today. We built DMN to support a healthy, diverse microbiome, which we now know plays a critical role in everything from digestion to immunity, metabolism, and even brain health. What sets DMN apart is that it contains clinically proven doses of ingredients like actazine and solnol, and it's a very concentrated source of polyphenols, all conveniently combined to nourish your gut bacteria and promote true microbial diversity. No artificial sweeteners, no gums or fillers, just science-backed, plant-based ingredients in a once-a-day, incredibly delicious drink. So if you're looking to fuel your microbes and enjoy all the benefits that come with that, head to 38terra.com and use the code SIMON for 10% off. That's 38terra.com and use the code SIMON to feed those gut bugs.